This episode is sponsored today by the book 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. This book was written by kids. It's for kids. It's a coloring book. When you have a tragedy of divorce and you have young children who do not know how to express themselves, this coloring book, 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce, is the coloring book for them. Pick it up today at blendingthefamily.com or even on Amazon. 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. Again, written by kids, for kids.
Welcome to Blending the Family, the podcast. Topics can range from dads hitting rock bottom, daughters watching their parents divorce, or even what is a good wine for couples to have while talking about finances. Here's your host, who once did 25,106 steps in one day. Unbelievable. Way to go. Here he is, Tommy Maloney.
Check baby, 1, 2, 3, 4. Check baby, 1, 2, 3. Check baby, 1, 2. Check baby, 1. It's called the rump shaker. Something. All right, I'll stop attempting to sing. Well, hello. How are you? Welcome to another episode of Blending the Family, the podcast. I am your host, Tommy Maloney, creator of this unique podcast. On today's episode, the founder of Dad's University and the podcast Dudes to Dads, I'm super excited, Jason Kreidman is on the phone. He's not on the phone. What are you thinking? All right, let me have some tea. I'm having some tea because I'll explain. Hold on, let me have some tea. Oh my gosh, that is hot. That's hot. Hold on. Bear with me. Having some honey vanilla chamomile. And I want to plug Celestial Seasoning. Celestial Seasoning here in Colorado. I believe they're in Boulder, Colorado. They should be caffeine free. Oh man. They should be sponsoring this podcast. Let's see. Another in Boulder. I think they're in Boulder. They're in Boulder, Colorado somewhere. Yeah, Boulder, Colorado. There it is, right on the label. Honey vanilla chamomile. I need caffeine. My wife Ann had a 7:15 flight out of Denver International Airport, and our family dog Duke decided to get up at 2:30 this morning, and Ann's alarm was going off around 3, I believe. I had some good tea. Actually, I added some more honey in it. But Ann's alarm went off, and I was just super tired. And then took her to the airport and turned around and came home and putzed around because I am a putz. So there. It's been a really interesting week, a weird week, a very, very weird week. I was driving home on Monday, and we've been having these wicked, or as they say in Boston, wicked. Hey, that's wicked. Wicked winds coming through. And this is bizarre. I'm driving home. It's windy as all get-go. It's raining, but not a hard rain. And my windshield wipers are going, and all of a sudden, the driver's side windshield wiper flew off. Bye-bye. Peace out. Nice seeing you. And as a joke this morning, as we were driving to the airport, I said to Ann, I go, by the way, when we got to the stretch of the road where the wiper blade fell off, I said, look for the wiper blade, because if you see it, I'm pulling this car over, because right now I don't have a driver's side wiper blade, which adds to the weirdness. Okay, I believe I've talked about this before, and listen, you don't have to believe in an almighty power. My thing is, there's no such thing as coincidence. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on that. if you know the story, the backstory, I quit the day job, was just not working out, and took this leap of faith, and part of it, I think, I can say I think I have more than one leap of faith going on. I had this one opportunity that fell through, so I smacked my face square on the earth after jumping off and taking that leap of faith. And then panic set in because it's like, oh crap, no income coming in. Well, this has been a very blessed week because I received an email from the treasurer from our hockey team that season's over. We're still talking baseball season. And I kept ignoring these emails because I didn't think... she was sending an email to say, hey, you have money left in the account. And I'm thinking... I mean, I was struggling this whole hockey season. Struggling. Trying to scrape up enough. I mean, they got to the point where it was close to... they might have had to not let Connor play. That's how close it was. Anyway, so the treasurer sends out an email saying, hey, there's still funds left in your account, and I looked at the email, and it wasn't like this is a blind copy type email. It was sent to specific parents, and I emailed her back. I said, I still have money left after paying extremely late. And she said, yeah. I go, well, how much money is there? And she goes, $130. I'm like, what? $130? Oh my gosh. That's perfect because I have, well, now it's less than $20 in my savings account, or my savings checking account. Because I put gas in the car from the airport, or else I wouldn't have, I think it would have been close. But, so I have $130 waiting for me to go pick up at this weekend. So I'm super excited about that. Have some more tea. Celestial Seasonings tea, I might add. Who should be a sponsor of this podcast? There we go. Much better. Cooling down now. So the windshield wiper fell off. Well, not fell, flew off. I now know I have some extra money that will help in the big scheme of things. And what else is going on? I'm trying to think. That's pretty much it. It's going to be a boys' weekend. Miss Becca has prom. Super excited about that. Oh my gosh. I mean, I remember when the girls, Betsy and Becca, were, I think Betsy was 15. I'm trying to think if she started driving yet. I don't know if she started driving yet. They were between 15 and 16. Now Betsy's 21. Becca's 16. Connor's 15. Time flies. Time is just going by. And that's something I just want to say to you. You can't get time back. You cannot get time back, no matter how hard you try. All right, there we go. I mentioned Jason. Jason Kreidman is on the podcast. And what do we talk about, Tommy? Thanks for asking. All right, so with Jason, again, he created Dad's University. Check out the YouTube channel, Dad's University, the podcast, Dudes to Dads. Jason recently, in the month of April, won an award locally in San Diego for just being a very good dad. I bring up the question with a lot more on the dads than I do with the moms, parenting experts. But I bring this up with Jason talking about, are we still living in the 1950s when it comes to dad's mentality? Talk about how he created his meetup group in San Diego. So again, if you're in the San Diego area, check out Dad's University meetup group. We talked about consistency when it comes to things in life. he did a video for his Dad's University YouTube channel talking about the cost of how much it's going to cost you parents by the time your kids are 17. Now, this is an average cost, and I had to mention something about, but these the average cost if your kid is playing an expensive sport like hockey. And there you go. Good tea. Good tea. Did I mention celestial seasoning? All right. I think I've said enough. I think I've said too much. I'm looking around my notes. Think that. Oh! Before I forget. 2 past podcast guests were super kind to send me their books, and I love books. I mean, here in the office I have Think and Grow Rich. And I know it, let's see, I think this book came out like in the 1930s. Let's see, just want to see. Bear with me. I find that special page. Let's see, this version. The version I'm holding is 2005. 2005. I thought it would say when the original, here we go. 1937. Originally published 1937. Anyway, so I don't want to lose my place there. All right, so I'm rereading, or I shouldn't say rereading. I am reading Think and Grow Rich. I had some stumbles reading it, and what I've been doing of lately is I have the CDs of the book. So as I'm driving, I'm listening to the CDs, and at night I read. But my original point is 2 of the podcast guests sent me their books. And I'm going to start with ladies first. So Amy Lyle, the Amy Bingar Kimmy's Lyle, Book of Failures, a funny memoir of missteps, inadequacies, and faux pas. Amy Lyle. Thank you, Amy. And she also sent me some really interesting bookmarks. These are bigger bookmarks. And then she autographed it. Got to read the autograph. To my bestie, Tommy Maloney, always fail forward. Heart, Amy Lyle. And I'm so... I love these bookmarks. If you go to the Instagram page, Blending Family, you'll see the book and you'll see the bookmarks. And then one of my mentors, one of my heroes, Marcus Aurelius Anderson, The Gift of Adversity, Overcoming Paralyzing, I can't speak, paralysis, there's the word, overcoming paralysis and pain to find purpose. Oh my gosh, a lot of P's there, a lot of trying not to pop the P's, as we would say in radio. Marcus Aurelius Anderson, The Gift of Adversity, and his autograph to Tommy, that's me, Make It Happen. Love it. Amy Lyle, Marcus Aurelius Anderson, thank you for sending me your books. Now I'm officially done, okay? Now I'm officially done. Jason Kreidman, founder of Dad University, the podcast Dudes to Dads. Check him out. Thanks for listening, tuning. Please, however you get this podcast, please leave a rating, review. Maybe that way Celestial Seasoning or maybe Zoom or ZipRecruiters. Who else does advertising? A bunch of people do advertising. Maybe you. Maybe you want to do a sponsorship for this podcast. Anyway, however you get this podcast, please leave a rating and review. And that's it. And I like this. I'm going to stick with the Terry Crews quote. That I heard. And that is, your success is my success. Hold on. Jason, you ready?
Yeah.
We're starting.
Got it.
So what was the pain point for creating Dad's University?
You know, we had my second child, and there was some frustration on my part on just really understanding what I was doing. I had a 2-year-old or 2.5-year-old. We now have having a second child, and I just was kind of stressed out. I was overworked, and my wife had said, "Hey, there's some parenting classes at the local school. What do you think?" And I said, "Are you joking? Like, why would I go to a parenting class? Like, my parents were great. But then I kind of took a step back and looked at my current situation and said, I've got a lot of frustrations here. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And so I took the parenting classes, and it just completely opened my eyes to the fact that there's easier ways of doing this, and not just necessarily for the children, but there's easier ways that can keep me more calm or can help me solve the problems that I'm facing. And so that was really the start of it. And that was literally almost 5-6 years ago. I started a local meetup group, and we just met once a month. And I said, if there's other guys out there like myself, there's probably, a need for this. And so just started talking, bringing in guys that were just having some issues, whether it was relationship or personal or parenting. And we started that. And then a couple years later, I started doing a podcast and did a weekly podcast. And then about 8 months ago, started doing the YouTube channel and started making weekly videos. So it's been an evolution. It's been sort of a passion project for me. And, I get to learn along the way, too. If there's subjects that I'm really interested in, then I, research them, look at my experience, talk to other dads about their experience. And so, it's really an evolution of me going through that process in the parenting journey myself.
Was it in the back of your mind that maybe subconsciously you weren't seeing enough dads in this space talking about parenting?
Oh, of course. It's funny. I took the parenting classes with my wife, and for the most part, there were some couples there, and then there was a bunch of moms. And then what happened is I ended up doing the instruction training to actually teach the classes. I was going down that road, and not so much that I wanted to teach at that time, but I just knew that there was more information, and so I wanted to get deeper about it. And I went to the instructor training, and I would say it was a dozen and a half, people or so, no other men.
Right.
I was the only man there. And that's where I sort of said, wow, it's one thing to, people that are interested in teaching it are men, but also, their audiences are women as well. And so, yeah, I mean, there was definitely a need, because when I knew that there had to be other guys like me, there was nothing really out there. That's why I started the group. I looked for whether it was support groups, whether it, was on the internet for advice. And there's a couple things here and there, but by and large, there's just not a lot of support for dads. I don't know if people don't think that dads need it, or that there's just the dads aren't going after, and looking for it. And now I have a better understanding of that. But at the time, I just didn't know what was going on.
So what do you think deep down the reason that men aren't attending these classes?
Well, it's not painful enough. And so, we do things based on either, pain or pleasure or fear or greed. And for men, the parenting role isn't painful enough for them to do anything about it. Now, if you talk about the relationship or, lack of intimacy or other things like that, men are all over it. They'll read stuff. They'll buy things to help them. But when it comes to parenting, it just doesn't seem painful enough. And it's unfortunate, because the reward is amazing. The benefit is amazing, and the input is so necessary that they feel like if they're just part of the family, they're spending time, then that's good enough, and not realizing that there are actual techniques and ways to improve upon what they're doing. And so I think that's a major reason for why there's sort of this, lack of involvement, by men and by parents, or I should say men in parenting.
Do you feel, I mean, this is my thought, that I still feel that even though it's 2018, that we have too many men who possibly, because the way they were raised, that their attitude is 1950 still, that they don't have to be necessarily involved with the kids. That, I mean, regardless if it's a traditional family or if it's a divorced family, that men, again, my view is that men just still have not embraced parentinghood.
Well, yeah, I think you're exactly right. And that touches on my point before, is that the pain is not enough. And part of that pain not being enough is the fact that there's typically somebody else who will handle it. And that's the mom. So the mom will take the nurturing role. The mom will take the active parenting. Sometimes, the father is probably more involved in discipline just because he might have a heavier voice and a heavier hand, to do that or be a little bit more aggressive, which is traditional, it doesn't make sense, but it's traditional. And so, yeah, I think you're right on. It's just something, there's another person there who will handle it, Men don't realize things or often take a proactive approach unless it like really affects them personally. And sometimes the parenting doesn't affect them or they don't see it. The other thing too, while I focus on parenting as a major topic, I'm also focused on the dad himself. And so that's one of the other things that, a dad or a man doesn't realize, because he's not talking about his emotion, because he's not talking about his frustrations, because he's not learning how to deal with it. You then have men who cheat, have addictions, are depressed, have anger issues, have addiction of, all kinds of substances and things, that's how it manifests itself. And so, that's one of the other things, is that men just kind of don't realize what's going on. They sort of mask it in other ways and not realizing that they can actually help themselves, and so I think, I think you're right on as far as what you're saying. One, it's just not painful enough, and two, there's somebody else there to handle it.
Yeah, I still feel a frustration that that as men, we're still not there as far as the ability to simply ask for help, and especially when it comes to parenting, that is such a vital role. I mean, in my opinion, I don't think we're just dads. I think we're mentors and, teachers of life skills. And like you were saying, there are too many times where dads will just push it on to the mom or just assume that the mom is going to take care of all those other things instead of taking a step into it, or I guess the new catchphrase is to lean in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that I think there certainly are men out there. I mean, granted, we're talking about it, so I don't want to say that there aren't men out there. There's whether people are listening to your podcast or watching my videos or such, they are taking steps to do that. Now, is it the majority? No. I mean, I think we have an uphill battle. Younger generation seems to be a little bit more involved. A little bit more proactive. So I think there's some hope. But, when we're hoping that the tide moves in the right direction, getting the support that we do, nobody looks at the material that we're putting out there and goes, oh, you guys are crazy. They say, wow, it's great. That this is really needed. And that's important. But I totally understand what you're saying, because the demand isn't necessarily as high as it needs to be or that it should be. So while we're providing the supply, if you will, we need the demand, and we need dads to actively seek out the information and actively seek out to improve their situations. And so they have to want it. They have to want to do that.
I want to go back to, Jason, when you first created your meetup group. What was that like, and what kind of positive what am I trying to say? I mean, what type of positive energy did you get out of that group to realize that I think I'm onto something?
It was funny. It was, I would say it was crumbs at first. I had trouble getting people to come. I had, and I put out emails out to my friends and other people. And quite frankly, people were just like, oh, okay, great. That sounds good. Hope it goes well. Participation was very, very difficult in the beginning. But in my heart, I knew that this was needed, and I just needed to hit the right audience and the right people. So, my circle of friends, if you will, and this isn't an excuse, but where I live and my surroundings of people are very active dads for the most part. They're some are self-employed, some are, whether they work, but they all are involved in their kids' activities and such. So I'm imagining it for my circle when I first started, they were like, okay, that's great, but that's not something I need. Not to, let alone whether it was parenting, know that their frustrations with their wives or their frustrations at work, or, that they could ease that, because I know that exists. I've heard the stories. I understand what's going on. I see the situations that have happened. And some of those could probably be eased or avoided by being in some sort of support group or getting advice from other dads who have been, through something. So at first it was very difficult, and it was, but I felt in my heart there was a mission that I had been set to do, and that is to get the word out that men can be manly. They can be, whether they think heads of households, however they want to appear or feel like they are, and yet still talk about emotion, be emotional, get their feelings out, have emotional intelligence, if you will. And it's okay. It's okay to do that. It doesn't make you any less of a man. It's just, it really is helpful to your mind and body and everything else. So I would say, I have a tendency to have long answers. The short answer is it was difficult. It was. I just stuck with it. I mean, there were days where I would show up by myself. There were other days where there'd be one person, and then all of a sudden there'd be a handful of half a dozen people, and then other, so it ebbs and flows. And I just stuck with it. One of the things I think that's been the reason I have been successful in multiple areas of my life, whether that be business, or such, or even I exercise every day. It's consistency. It's not something, and that's the same thing with parenting. It's not something that just happens on a weekend. It's not something that just happens once in a while. If you're taking care of yourself or you're taking care of somebody else, it's consistency. And so that's the approach I took with my meetups. It's the approach I take with the podcast and the videos. It's just, it's every week, and I'm consistent. I've been doing the podcast now for 3.5 years or 3 years or so every week, and it's consistency.
Is the meetup group still around?
Yeah, we meet once a month here in North San Diego, and guys sometimes drive an hour from South San Diego to be there, and so we still meet once a month.
And what's the name of the meetup group?
It's Dad University.
Okay.
It was originally called Dudes to Dads,
right,
which is the name of the podcast, but it's called Dad University now.
I want to talk about some of the videos that you've produced, and I love them because, as a guy, they're simple. I don't have to overthink.
Right. It actually has the numbers 1, 2, 3.
Exactly.
4. Yeah. Right.
And on one of the videos you were talking about the cost of raising a child by the time I believe it was 17.
Right.
And the number was $233,000. And I'm going to argue that because that probably doesn't include if the child plays hockey as a goalie, because that number is way too high for me.
Right. Well, you got to remember it's an average, so there's plenty of kids that don't participate. But yes, for the ones that do, or, say go to private school or play some sort of sport. And like you said, I think I just saw something where they were talking about the most expensive sports, and hockey, I think, was at the top of the list, or the top two.
Oh, God, don't say that.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I still have my son's 15, another 3 more years of this. Yeah.
But it brings a lot of joy, right? It's worth the joy for both you and him.
Well, yeah, and the backstory of my son playing hockey was that right after, I shouldn't say right after, but after my divorce, I was still working part-time at one of the local ice rinks, and I would ask my son to come and go and do public skating, and he had zero interest. And then the first Thanksgiving that I had him, I said, hey, let's go to one of the ice rinks and let's go do public skating. And I said, but all I want from you is just 1 lap. You do 1 lap, we're done. We'll go home, okay? We didn't leave, Jason. We stayed the whole time. And then he started to get an interest in playing hockey, which that was, for me, a short, fat, white guy, that was always the perfect sport for me.
Right.
Especially, and the sad thing, I was a goalie. And my son all of a sudden said, I want to play hockey. I'm like, all right. I didn't necessarily encourage him to play hockey. I wanted him to play a sport.
Right.
And he started playing hockey. And then his second year of playing, he kept asking me to coach him. And I said, no, I want you to learn from other guys. And there are some great, one of my dearest friends, his wife is an excellent hockey coach too. So there are great moms and dads and men and women out there who can coach. And so, long story short there, Jason, was I took the step and got certified to coach. And
oh, cool.
I did that, and I wrote a blog post about this years ago. I called it, I cheated and got caught. And what that meant was I was wanting to spend more time with my son. I'm divorced. I only have him every other weekend. What other avenues can I do to be able to spend more quality time with him? And that's how I got into coaching, because now instead of every other weekend, now it's every weekend. And then they asked me to become a head coach, which I was not qualified for. I mean, it was one of those really bad Three Stooges movies where they need volunteers and everybody backed up and those 3 are still standing there. That was me. That was me. But it really gave me more time with him. And so that was one of the biggest things that I was so excited about was time. Because, and we're going to talk, I want to talk to you about, because one of your other videos you talked about rules. And one of my notes I wrote down, well, that's a traditional family versus a blended family. But before we get into that, so I took my time with my son for granted because I thought I would be married one time, that's it. And, during the divorce, I was working, I was traveling, and it really hit me that I can't get that time back.
Yeah.
That time was gone.
Right. You're creating memories, and that's crucial. That's what it is about, is the, sometimes the quantity of time is not nearly as important as the quality, and you're realizing that, and wow, I only have so much time. I better make that time count. And, I think if more dads thought that way, that we'd have a little bit different society. That, you don't live forever. We're here. We're very, very lucky to be on this planet at this time, in this situation, have these kids. You're very, very lucky. And, I think the people who realize that live a different way. They live a different a different life and a different outlook, if you will. So, I mean, kudos to you. That's, you realize, wow, I only have this much time. I better make the most of it. And those are the kinds of the decisions that change a child's life.
Well, and it changes, in our situation, a dad's life too.
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your dad?
It's funny. I did a podcast about that. I actually interviewed my dad on one of the podcasts. And, I was very into sports when I was young. And so my dad, I feel like what I have is an excellent relationship with my dad. He just came over last weekend. And I felt like I always have. So it's not something like I reconnected as an adult. I was very lucky in having two wonderful parents. Just very, very lucky, and supreme gratitude about that. And so, I had a mom who was an author and seminar speaker on relationships, and, very, very successful. And so she practiced what she preached. She was great at home. She, helped people around the world, and my father was hardworking. I saw work ethic. He was always present when he could. I remember him coming home early as much as, he worked at a corporate job for 25 years or 30 years, but would always make time for us because we were involved in swimming and sports and all kinds of stuff. And so a lot of that was his involvement in those kinds of things, like you're doing, with your son. And so I always just remember having good conversation, him being supportive and being there. And that's continued on to this day. It's having a really, really good relationship. When we talk with him, and it was interesting to actually get the perspective from his side now as an adult. But, and he had said, well, it was all your mom, she was sort of the driver, and she would tell him, hey, do this. This is what you need to do. Go do this. Go here, be here, and he did it. But as a result, yeah, I have what I would consider a great relationship, and great respect. Actually, looking back now and being a dad, just how much effort it takes, how much time it takes, the patience. There's all kinds of things that are really, really important as a parent.
Are there any life lessons that resonate with you because of what your dad did as part of, being present, as you said?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. He, for sure, work ethic was something, and consistency. I just did a video on life lessons that I learned, from me being a dad. And those are things like empathy and, there's a patience and those kinds of things. But from my dad, I think I learned the hard work, the consistency, integrity. There's some very honesty, all those kinds of things. I always looked up to my dad for being an honest, hardworking guy, and to this day, I still think of him that way,
You did something that I'm wanting to do, and I'm extremely nervous to do, and that is to interview my dad on the podcast too.
Oh, do it. You've got to do it.
I'm scared. I love my dad to death. My dad is just like, he's my biggest fan, and he's such an encourager. Mm-hmm. And, I'll put something up on LinkedIn and I'll have one like, and it's from him, or something on Facebook and it's from him. I'll a podcast, and he'll have a comment. It's just
I would
so
say
wonderful.
Do it yesterday. Interview. I would say. That for sure was so valuable for me to have that. And in fact, I'd go even further and say interview your son as well. And having that documented to me, I've had both of my children on the podcast. And, for little topics and things, they were, 5 or 7, 6 at the time. But having the conversation and recording it was just awesome. And some of the things that he, had input on for sure, and just the experiences that he had, I learned a lot, because sometimes you just don't have those conversations, or it says, wow, I didn't realize that that's how he viewed it, or that's the perspective that he had. And
for example, what did you learn in that conversation?
I think just a little bit more about his childhood, because his father passed away before I was born. And so I never knew his father. And so I didn't get, and he had some tumultuous relationship. There was some abuse and things. And so I kind of knew some of it, but I never really got deep into it or asked too many questions. But of course, when you're an interviewer, you got to ask the questions. And I think it was just the perfect time for me to ask, well, so what happened here and what happened here? And as he was talking, I was realizing how difficult he had it, and how he wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case for us, and just, I think if anything, just a greater level of respect for what he and my mother had done, and, they kind of both came from more, lower income, but they just didn't think of that way. It was sort of, of course it was a different time. It was very innocent when they got together. They were the first, they were their first boyfriend, girlfriends, and sort of doing that. I mean, just really interesting things when you start hearing it about your family and the legacy. And so, yeah, there's no reason I can think of to not do it.
Did you have a new respect for your dad after that interview?
Absolutely. I had always had a great respect for him and the things that he had done for me. I think after the interview, I had more individual respect as a father for him, and kind of what he had gone through, his approach towards things. It was very, very, very good. I can't for anybody. In fact, whether, somebody out there does a podcast or not, even if you're recording, recording audio is great because you can hear it. You could record video. Nowadays it's so easy to just pick up your phone and record something. But, for those that are in our lives and older, the people that are older, absolutely, I would suggest, write a bunch of questions and just interview your dad. Or interview your mom, or interview somebody. The older people are fascinating in the things that they've been through, for sure.
Well, it's funny you say that, because maybe it's been a few years, but my oldest bonus daughter, Betsy, interviewed my grandmother, and I was not in the room. I was in another room, but I was listening, and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And that is, besides interviewing my dad, that's something I want to do as well, is just interview my grandmother, because especially when it comes to the world of parenting and divorce, my grandmother's in her 90s.
Oh, and you have to.
Yeah, and those
here, for nothing else, even if you don't publish it, just for your own records and your own things, for sure. Certainly, we know as podcasters and stuff that we can edit things and you can keep what you want and, not put up other stuff. But even if you don't publish it, please record it. I think it's worth it.
Yeah. I want to hear more of her story. And she took a class where she lives. She lives in one of those retirement communities, and somebody came in to teach how to write your memoir, and she was really into it, and then just nothing. And so every time I visit her, I see her maybe once, twice a month, and so how's the memoir coming? And she just looks at me like, just shut up. And I think that's a perfect opportunity, like you were saying, Jason, is to, even if you don't produce it, is to have that conversation and learn from from others and learn the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, and one of the things, too, that if somebody, like a parent, is not into it, they're like, why? Who cares? Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. It's not true. They don't need to do it for themselves. They need to do it for other people. So, if your grandma or dad or whoever, maybe their soft spot is the grandkids, or something else, then that's who they can do it for and say, you know what, I want them to be able to look back and hear what you had to say and get your thoughts on things and such. Because maybe if you can find their soft spot, they might be a little bit more willing to do it.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the video about house rules. Mm-hmm. And this is why I really wanted you on the show, is because you do have what I would call a traditional family versus our family, where we're a blended family, and something you talked about, and it's the rules. And I love the fact that you have the rules laminated, so the kids are aware of what they need to live by. Mm-hmm. But here's where, in our space, in the blended family space, the rules don't always work because houses are different. In our household, and I know you talked about this, about, keeping the kids' rooms clean and things like that. I got to the point where, I'd rather have a different battle. I can just close the door, especially in my son's room. I'm like, right. Every once in a while I walk in there and going, I'm surprised the EPA hasn't shown up yet. But
yes, I understand.
But in your expert opinion, what rules can we, as a blended family, also incorporate as a traditional family, if that makes sense?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not in a blended family, but I can maybe offer, because this is a situation that no matter what family you're in, you have to do this process. And the first thing is you have to sit down and talk about it. So if you are in communication with an ex or somebody that you're co-parenting with, that conversation is very important, and say, hey, I understand we both may have different ways of doing parenting. You might have this, or your bedtime's different, or, your rules for eating are different, whatever that might be. But I'd like to come to some agreement on things that we both can make sure that we incorporate. And so if that is something as be respectful by saying please and thank you, or, it's, using nice words and not yelling. I mean, whatever that is for your family, to discuss that with the co-parent. And so if that's possible, and I think that having that conversation, because you're also respecting the things that they want, and you have to do that too. So let's say you have an ex and the children are with them half the time or whatever, and, they have an earlier bedtime. Well, maybe, and that's a really, really important thing to your ex, then maybe you can do that and say, you know what, I that is something that's important to them. I'm talking meanwhile, I'm not in that situation, so I know that can be difficult. But for the best of the children, what are some things that we can agree on that they can do in both families, and that we have, quote, we are the family or house rules. Now, then there might be some that are different. You say, hey, when you are at our house, these are our rules, but I'm sure that that's difficult unless because especially if you can't have that conversation, or you don't have that relationship with the ex or their parent or, their mom, that's going to be difficult. But if you can, I think that's the ideal situation.
Well, I think what you're saying about the please and thank you, I mean, that's key. That's not just a house rule. That is a great life skill that we as parents need to instill. I mean, I can't remember which video it was, but you talked about somewhat mirroring. If you're going to do
monkey see, monkey do comes into almost all my videos.
Yeah.
You've got to act. You've got to act it, and you've got to live it, and you've got to be it if you want your children to do it.
Yeah, especially if you're not saying please and thank you, and the expectation for the child is, well, if I have to do it, why aren't you doing it?
Absolutely, and they're right. Our family rules they are life rules, if you will. I mean, it's listen to each other. Always tell the truth. I have one, eat good stuff before bad.
Yeah, I saw that. I thought that was great.
Well, yeah, because, you can't avoid bad foods. And, there's always something. In our family, exercise and play, and so that's an important thing of, they need to play. They need to run around. They need to do that. Helping around the house, that's just a family rule, And these will change. I mean, as they get a little older, these might change. Or if they're just really good at something. I mean, let's say, they already say please and thank you. And, you don't have to keep reminding them of that. And they're polite. Then, you change the rule. And you can do whatever. It's something that evolves. And maybe, you review these and see what worked for your family every once in a while.
Yeah. Every once in a while, if my son and I are grabbing a bite to eat, and if he doesn't say please or thank you, he gets a little kick from me.
There you go.
It's just a subtle reminder.
Right. Right.
That's what I wrote down. One of your rules you talked about possibly that you have to take your shoes off before you walk in the house. That was always my dad's rule at his apartment.
Not a rule, but I said that's a rule that a lot of people do have.
It just cracked me up.
We got so frustrated that we just got better floors. That just because carpet just is horrible for all of that. So we just have both hardwood and tile floors, so that having the shoes doesn't matter as much.
Well, again, it cracked me up because there were times where my son and I would take a trip to Chicago and go visit my dad. And before we even walked into the apartment, my son would turn to me and go, "Don't forget, take off your shoes." I'm like,
yep.
But that's a good thing because he understands. Yeah, exactly. He's been programmed.
Well, I was saying I've always thought of doing a book that's called 1,000 Times. And it's the number of times as a parent that you need to tell your children to do something before they actually do it.
Sometimes 1,001.
Right.
My one of my next books is going to be called You Want to Be a Stay-at-Home Dad, and just give life lessons of it's not that easy.
No, I can't imagine that it is. And, for many dads who don't stay home and that might look at their wife who does stay home in any sort of negative way, because it does happen. I've talked to the guys in the meetup and they're like, wow, my wife's staying at home. It's just like, I wish she was working, whatever. Try it. I say to them, try it, especially what I'm saying when they're young.
Yeah.
Spend 2 days alone with a 2-year-old, and you tell me that if that is easier than going and managing 25 people at an office, it's not.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, as I've told the story 1,000 times, is that my former wife, she told me I would not be really successful at being a stay-at-home dad because I'm an only child. I had never babysat, let alone ever changed a diaper before.
Right.
But it was fun. I mean, I forced myself to get out of my comfort zone, meaning had to get out of the apartment, found things to do. You talked earlier about going to that the parenting group. I would go to jamboree,
yep.
or Gymboree, whatever it was called. and I would be the only dad there. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. I was okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There, for the dads that do enjoy it and feel fulfilled, then it's awesome. But I think, for those dads that may look at their wife or look at the person who is the stay-at-home in any kind of negative way, I mean, it works both ways. It's not an easy gig, though.
No, but I tell people it was the best job I ever had.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So we've all made mistakes, Jason. We've all made some mistakes.
No way.
I know, hard to believe, especially as men. We never make mistakes.
Oh, did you just mean today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What? Any funny stories come to mind of parenting mistakes or dad mistakes you've made?
Like I said, I mean, on a daily basis, I recall putting my son, before I knew that, putting my son in timeout when he was about 2 years old. He didn't even know what timeout was, and I left him. I mean, he was within, we could view him. He was sitting on the steps for an hour. I mean, my wife still brings this up as a funny thing. And this is before I took any parenting classes.
Right.
Literally, that kid is screaming and crying. I mean, it was completely useless. And yeah, I mean, those are the mistakes I made and continue to make all the time. And I've talked about this, is that we try to be wonderful in all areas. And the reality is that we can't be perfect all the time in all areas. And some days you're a really good parent, and then you're a horrible husband. Or you're a great employee another day, and then you're a bad parent. And so, the key is accepting yourself. Self-acceptance is a big one. And just knowing that it's okay to make those mistakes. And when you start looking at it that way, you have to realize that your children are going to make a lot of mistakes too, and that our job is to teach them and coach them for life. And so when you stop thinking of yourself as a, quote, parent and disciplinarian and those kinds of things, and instead thinking of yourself as a coach or teacher, your parenting style changes. So that when, your child is 5 years old and spills the milk all over the floor, you're not yelling at them. You're saying, hey, okay, we spilled the milk. Let's grab a towel and let's start cleaning it up, and things like that. And, when you start to realize that it's all kinds of mistakes are going to be made, and the hope is that they don't keep repeating the same mistake over and over, and so you have to give them those tools to not make those mistakes again. So, but as far as specifics, yeah, I mean, that's one. Me just getting so upset because my daughter couldn't find her shoes, and she's 5 years old going into kindergarten. I mean, I had zero empathy that day. I had zero empathy, and realized that shortly after, saying, if I pictured myself as a 5-year-old and I couldn't find my shoes, it was such a big deal for her. But I didn't take it like that. I looked at it from an adult standpoint. I was just like, well, there's another pair of shoes right next to it. Just grab the other pair. Who cares? We're late,
But
and
Dad, those were her favorite shoes, probably.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. They're, and they blinked and they lit up. And, but those are the kinds of things that happen all the time. And giving yourself the permission to, and I looked at it afterwards. I dropped her off, and she was really upset. And I thought to myself, I was like, how could I have handled that better? And I started just looking at different ways and analyzing it. And that's kind of the impetus of how all this evolved, of I've got to be able to do things in a way that makes me less stressed. I stress enough about my own life and work and everything else. I don't want to be stressed about my kids all the time. And how can I ultimately teach them to be good, moral human beings that are self-sufficient, have good self-acceptance and self-esteem, and just try to do that. And so those become top of mind things when I'm interacting with them. Do I make mistakes? Absolutely. All the time. But I also then forgive myself for those mistakes much quicker and figure out how can I make it better.
Well, one of the things I was starting to think about too is a very similar situation as far as your son and the timeout was my son and I and were at this here in Colorado. It's called Boondocks, and they have outdoor bumper cars. They've got indoor games. I mean, it's a whole slew of things. And he had a major meltdown because he wanted to go on the bumper boat ride, and then all of a sudden decided not to and just had this meltdown. And he was about 5 at the time. And
that's normal.
Yeah. I still can't believe as much of his meltdown. I stayed calm the whole time, got him in the car. He refused to put a seatbelt on. Calmly, like I said, Jason, I still can't believe how calm I was. Calmly told him to put his seatbelt on, and he saw the rage in my eyes, but which was a good thing because he put his seatbelt on, took him home to my townhome, and I did the same thing, Jason. He stayed in his room, kicking and screaming for about 2 hours.
Right.
And I didn't realize, how long he should have been in so-called timeout. He would come out, start screaming at me and yelling at me, and then go back in his room and slam the door. And I'm just like, okay, whatever.
Yeah, and you think about it, it's like, what are they learning?
Yeah.
What are they learning versus if you at the time would have been really empathetic? Yes. And just said, gosh, you know what? I know you want to go on that ride or you don't want to go on that ride, and I'm so sorry. That is really, really upsetting. And then just give them a hug. Yeah. Or whatever it is. And so it is really hard to put yourself, as a 40-year-old man putting yourself in a 5-year-old's shoes. Yeah. But sometimes you got to figure out how to do it.
And, that's one of those biggest parenting regrets I have, other than the time where he crawled off the bed, but he survived that. It's all good. Along those lines, I want you to talk about when you're supposed to ignore them.
Well, I think there's different styles of discipline, and ignoring is one of them. It doesn't always work in all kinds of situations because for some kids, ignoring them can escalate the situation because they want the attention. And so they're going to just keep going and further and further and further. So there's a couple things, discipline wise that make sense. The first is positive reinforcement. So when they are doing things that are good, instead of us just expecting that, we have to make a huge deal about it. So when they do say thank you, when they do, talk nicely, or they ask for what they need, or, they talk to their sibling in a civilized manner, or talk friendly, or they're playing nice, or whatever, we have to say, I can't, that is just so great. You are playing, blah, 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 and positive reinforcement. For the ignoring part, it varies. I have a tendency to do that when my children will yell something or demand something without being respectful of whether it's my space or their tone of voice or whatever. And my children now get it. So they may yell, it's like, go get me this or something. I mean, granted, they don't talk like that now, but, whatever that, something like that. And they'll know I just won't respond. And then they'll say, excuse me, Dad, is it possible that I can get some more juice or, whatever. And then I say, oh, yeah, sure. You can, I'm up. I can help you. Right. And so that's the kind of things that I've ignored. When it's a, huge deal or some sort of tantrum, sometimes that's too, where you just don't pay attention, but you actually might tell them that and say, hey, listen, I'm going to be over here. You can go ahead and have your tantrum. Go ahead and do that. But when you are ready to talk and you are ready to calm down, let me know. And you're just remaining calm and doing that. So, yeah, I think, ignoring them can be a very good tactic, but sometimes if they're very young, they won't understand why you're ignoring them. But they do over time understand that they're not getting the reaction they want based on the behavior that they're doing, you know?
Well, and one of the things you had brought up earlier, and it seems to be a common theme with a lot of people in the parenting coaching space, and that is having those family meetings. And one of the things that I recommend, especially to couples that are about to go from dating to becoming a blended family, is having those early meetings and talking about discipline, and having, like you were talking earlier about the rules, and having those meetings ahead of time so everybody's on the same page and having those expectations.
Yeah, and I think an important point to make sure is to get their input. You know, a lot of times the meetings consist of, meaning the parent wants to make sure the children understands what's going on.
Right.
And the family meetings are designed so that everybody has input and their voice is heard. And so part of that is asking them, you know, what are some of the things that you're concerned about? Or what do you think would be the best way to go about doing this? Or, you know, because they're part of the family, you need to include them. It is not a parent dictating everything. Now, as a parent, you might end up controlling the situation or the conversation in a direction that you are happy with, but that doesn't mean you need to negate what they're saying and allow them to voice their opinion. Otherwise, they're going to feel like, you know, there's no point on me saying anything because my dad or mom's not going to listen. You know, you do not want them to feel that way. You want them to feel like you're hearing them, or they want to feel like you're hearing them and that you understand. And so that's a really important part of meetings, is to make sure that the children get input in whatever it is. I've even used them for input on how to solve them fighting. You know, that's a very, very common one in our house where they're not getting along, they're siblings, they're not getting along, they're yelling. I say, hey, guys, it doesn't look like what you're doing is working. You know, what do you think we should do in this situation? How can we solve this? You know, and they're very smart. I mean, children are very smart. And so they might say, well, maybe we can take turns. Or, you know, the first response might be, well, I don't want to solve it. It's my toy. And then you say, okay, well, I understand it's your toy, but you also have somebody here who shares their toys with you. How can we solve? And you just keep repeating the same thing 20
Right.
times. You say, but if you did know, how would you do it? Because they say, I don't know.
Well, that was an eye opener for me. Was when I married my wife. Again, she has 2 daughters, and I'm an only child, and it took me many years to understand conflict resolution, because again, I was always home alone.
Right.
And when the girls would get into their little sibling arguments, I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to solve it. I didn't, you know, and the best thing I would be able to do was to run and hide.
Yeah. Well, you say something interesting, too, is because we as men always believe that we need to solve situations.
Exactly.
You know, like, oh, there's something wrong, I got to solve it. Or, hey, this is broken, I got to fix it. And the truth is that that's not the case. You know, and when it comes to children even too, you don't always have to solve it. You may be a guide or a coach, but the real way of handling it is to help them solve it themselves. And that's a common theme that, you know, I believe in and that we go over here, you know, at Dad University. It's just, you know, teaching them how to solve the things themselves, the situation. So whether it be siblings, whether it be a frustration at school, whether it be, you know, a friend that's giving them grief, like, you know, there's certainly times where a parent can step in, but for the most part, you really try to be a coach and to say, well, what do you think you could do to solve this? Let them come up with the answers. And then you might say, well, that sounds reasonable. Have you tried that? You know, and you don't have to solve all the problems. You know, it's the same thing in sales. You know, somebody just wants to talk about their problems. You don't have to necessarily solve them right there. You know, you just have to let them vent, let them figure it out. So that's a very common thing.
I do want to touch again on your video about money-saving tips. And one of them was talking about the toys. Mm-hmm. And something I just learned last month. My son and I went to a hockey game here in Colorado. He and I are huge Chicago Blackhawk fans, and we went there to hopefully watch the Blackhawks beat the Colorado Avalanche. That was not the case. But we ran into one of his hockey teammates and his mom. And she was telling me that for Christmas, instead of getting them toys that, we know as parents, in 10 minutes, that toy has been replaced with another toy and they've moved on.
Yep.
But one of the things she does is they have 2 boys and a girl. And they each, instead of getting a toy, they get an event. And so the event was, again, this going to see the Blackhawks versus the Avalanche. And I really find it fascinating that we don't do enough of those. We don't really, we think that the physical toy is the end-all, be-all versus some type of event.
Yeah, it doesn't, the toy or the object doesn't last very long. It goes out of style, it becomes boring, it breaks. When you go to an event, that memory lasts forever, and especially if you record it or take a picture of it or whatever. We're big believers in that. For the holidays this year, we reduced drastically any sort of gift giving internally with our family, and we all went on a family trip. We just did a couple small little things, and then we went on a family vacation together. And that was our holiday trip. And the kids loved it. They had great experiences. And, we're trying to instill that. And it is hard. It's hard when everybody is getting gifts and they want things. And, we all know that. But it's just time and over time and continue to do it and show it yourself by – when they ask you, it's your birthday, and you say, no, I would just love to maybe hang out with you on a Saturday. That would be a great gift for me. Rather than you don't have to get me a new shirt. I don't need a new shirt or a tie. Let's go on a run together, or let's play catch, or let's just play a board game, or for me, time is way more valuable. And not having a lot of it, it becomes even more valuable as you realize how much you can't get it back, as you said in the beginning of this, of this podcast. You don't get that time back.
I saw this on Instagram, and I'm creatively stealing this, and I thought this was brilliant for our conversation. And it's from Daddy Cool Project. So I highly recommend, go find Daddy Cool Project on Instagram. And they put a question out today, and I'm just going to read the question, but I'm going to customize it for our discussion. Name something every father should tell his son. So name something every father should tell his son, and I want to customize it to name something every father should tell his son or daughter. Anything come to mind, Jason?
Wow. It sounds like a good video to record. Something that they should tell their daughter or son. Yeah, I would say one of them is, I love you unconditionally. It doesn't matter what you do, how you do it. I will love you no matter what.
Yeah, that's, again, coming from being a divorced dad, when I started thinking more and more about how do I stay connected with my son, especially when I'm not living in that house, was very along those same lines. And that was, I would do my best, even though I was traveling for work, I would do my best to call him every night to just simply say, I love you. Yep. And, I personally feel that kids cannot hear that enough.
Yeah, and I think, to clarify what I was, also talking about is regardless of the mistakes that they're going to make and say, you know what, you're going to make some really dumb ones. We all do. I'm going to love you no matter what. My love is not conditional on how you act or what you accomplish or anything like that. Even if you're making the right decisions or wrong decisions, I'm still going to love you. And so they shouldn't have to question or be motivated to say, hey, if I do this, maybe my parents will love me. That's something that a child should never have to face.
Well, one of the things I've done, I had this conversation with my son, and I've also had this conversation with one of my bonus daughters, Becca. And that was, if you ever find yourself in a situation, so for example, they're at a party and there's drugs involved and alcohol, and you don't feel comfortable, you have every right to either give myself or your mom a call to say, hey, I need help, no questions asked.
Right.
And I think those are those conversations like you're talking about, Jason. We as parents, we need to have those conversations, those open conversations. I mean, we have Kinley call my wife's daughter, Becca, and my son, Connor, the Wonder Twins, because they really could be brother and sister, other than my son has brown eyes. But they it's funny, they do look very similar. And last weekend I told them, I said, if either of you, because Becca's 16, Connor's 15, and I said, if either of you get anybody pregnant or become pregnant, I will have to hurt you.
Right.
And it was, half kiddingly, but again, there are times where we really do need to have those difficult conversations to remind them you have to make the right decision.
Well, so you got to be careful in those situations where when you handle information that you don't like, you have to be careful how you handle that, because as a parent, if you handle it poorly, they're not going to tell you anymore. So, and I think this is probably an entire podcast by itself, a separate one. But when a child comes to you and tells you something that you can't believe and it's horrible, or you, in your mind, you can't, that could be that they did drugs, that they did get pregnant, that they, whatever it is. You have to be very careful with how you handle that, or else you will begin to sever the trust on them telling you things in the future. So as they become teenagers, the fact that they are confiding in you and say, hey, you know what, Dad? There was a party and I had a drink. I had one drink, or, whatever. How you handle that as a parent is so crucial in setting up how the future is going to go. Because if you continue like, I can't believe you did that. We don't do that in our house, blah, 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 whatever. The rules. You will begin to sever that relationship, and that child will begin to either lie to get around it, because they're going to do what they're going to do. What we have to understand and try to instill is, we have to help them make the right decisions. The right decision had nothing to do with the fact that they told you. And so in that situation, you say, you know what? I thank you so much for telling me and really entrusting me to do that.
Yes.
How do you, how would you handle that situation? You're going to be in those situations. How do you handle that? What do you think, would you have done something differently? Could you still do, and you kind of have to leave it up to them to grow. So and this, quite frankly, this is the same thing in a relationship. When you're the dad, you're the husband, and your wife tells you about an expensive dress that she purchased. and you'd fly off the handle. And you're like, I can't believe that. We don't have the money to do that. You spent the money, blah, blah, blah. Guess what is going to happen next time? She's going to purchase the dress, and she's not going to tell you. And she's going to use cash instead of a credit card or whatever. And so that we cause often our children, our spouses, our friends, other people around us to lie to us. And we cause that because of how we react and how we handle it. So, and I'm not just saying we let things go and nothing's a big deal and we just don't worry about it. But we have to be very, very careful with how we handle those things. And as a parent and our children are beginning to experience life things, real life, drugs, drinking, pregnancy, I mean, those are real stuff. We have to be very, very mindful on how we handle those. You just gave me a good idea for a video, so.
I want credit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jason Kreidman, sorry.
I've heard it all kinds of ways.
Founder of Dad University. I highly recommend, please go to his YouTube channel, Dad University, the podcast Dudes to Dads. I want to thank you so much, Jason, for coming on. I knew this would be a very informative episode, and I'm just happy to have somebody else who has some testosterone as of late.
Thank you. No, it was great. I always love, talking about it. I appreciate what you're doing as well and spreading the word. And, whether it be blended families or just parenting in general, it's really important, the work that we're doing, and to keep that in mind, as you continue to. We need more of us, and we need to support each other. And, it's okay for dads to, be parents. You can still be manly, still be masculine, and still have emotion. So,
I agree.
So thank you.
Thank you for listening to Blending the Family. That was an interesting, fun fact during the show.
This episode is sponsored today by the book 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. This book was written by kids. It's for kids. It's a coloring book. When you have a tragedy of divorce and you have young children who do not know how to express themselves, this coloring book, 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce, is the coloring book for them. Pick it up today at blendingthefamily.com or even on Amazon. 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce. Again, written by kids for kids.